over the years, the same problems kept coming up, and it was people didn't feel cared for, or they struggled to care for themselves for various reasons. Environments didn't support them. There wasn't a culture of care. It was looked down on to care for yourself, set boundaries. So care was this big thing. Also, are people checked up on? Are they supported in that? I was realizing that I was so far down this river and people were way up there falling in because of so many other reasons. And I was down there trying to help people get themselves out the river. There were so many more factors that were going into this. So when I go into school, I support individual staff, groups of staff, whole cohorts of staff through group coaching, workshops, all of these different elements. But then on a leadership tier as well, we look at what leaders can do for that. So I don't think that most people in our schools are there to be cruel or distant or cold. The kind of people that get into teaching, we're not there to do damage to other people. We're there to support each other. I think there's a real culture of bashing leaders at the moment and really putting a lot of pressure on individual people rather than looking at it as like a team effort.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Why I Cannot Even Speak. What is going on? Hello. Well, I'll start again. Right, so you're going to edit the first bit out.
No, that's staying in. It's staying in.
No,
it's staying in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It threw me. So Ben has edited it out or he's left it in, whichever way he wanted to do it. But it froze. Literally, as soon as it launched, it didn't for everybody else, but it froze for me and I was like panicked. I thought, I'm out. So I'm in. Welcome, everybody. It is an absolute pleasure, as always. Me and Ben have done 17 recordings today. It's a Saturday, the 1st of May. And all of those are lies because Ben's not allowed to say about time of day, how many we've recorded and where we're at, but I'm doing it all and just lying to you. So you can take as much. And also, what people is going to throw at people is, I remember the last evening we recorded on Ben, I also wore a hat and a hoodie. So people think that we are back to back now, and that's not. It's just I've only got one hat and one pair of clothes. So that's where we're at. But how's things, Ben, before we dive into our guest? Life good? You are on mute. We're all getting it wrong. What's going on?
I absolutely love it. Yes, I love the fact that I've been laughing, taking the piss out of you inside. I didn't do it out loud, and then I've just started talking to you with my mic off. Yeah, no, mate, things are good at this end. Yeah, it's been a good few weeks. Had some lovely little bits of travel for work, and Edufuturists stuff is buzzing. So I'm hoping at some point we're going to be able to announce the cover of the book because that's moving, isn't it, mate? Like we've got some original ideas and where that's going to go. So fingers crossed we can put that out into the world very soon.
Well,
which is
that
quite exciting.
book, and then we've also got the designs for the trends booklet. So it's all going on. The designs are absolutely on point for all of it, to be fair. So it is to get it all out. Fingers crossed if it all aligns and the stars align to get it to anybody that attends the Edufuturists Uprising on the 25th of June. You'll get to see it all for the first time. So that is going to be really, really cool. So,
I can't see these books being printed back. But I'm being hopeful. I want to be hopeful. I want to be positive.
Whoa. Just
positive Pete today.
They said that that's going to happen until they tell us they don't, and then we've just got to get over it, man. And we'll stomp our feet and then just realise that we can't do anything about it. So that's just fine, isn't it? So yeah, should we dive into the guest? Let's get going. We have met before. Charlie, you attended our roadshow event at Canberra HQ. Is that correct? You were part of the Wolf Pack, and you sampled it for the first time. But for those people that maybe didn't get to see you and meet you for the first time, you have a social media following and do a lot of work. So do you want to introduce yourself and your journey to here, if that's all right, mate?
Yeah, absolutely. I never know how to introduce myself, really. It's always feels a little bit self-indulgent. But my name is Charlie Burley. I go by the Teacher's Health Coach. And essentially, I work with staff individually, but also schools and leadership as well, to help them, in essence, rewrite wellbeing from the ground up, completely restructure what that looks like in their schools. Again, it's on a one-to-one level with individual teachers and school staff, and I've worked with CEOs all the way through to support staff and business managers. So it really is kind of for anyone who's in that school environment. And that side of stuff is in our Building Better Balance program. That's more geared towards the individual, healthy habits, supporting mental health, workload management, stress management, that sort of stuff. Whereas the rewriting wellbeing stuff is really geared towards schools, leaders, and trying to create systemic change in those organizations, basically. But yeah, I was a teacher for 8 years, primary teacher, key stage 2, upper key stage 2 mostly, so year 6 and all that fun sort of stuff. And then yeah, kind of basically about 5 years in, hit burnout pretty much. Some call it a bit of a mental breakdown, but burnout was kind of the language I use for it. And it just, the whole process of being diagnosed with chronic stress and anxiety and having panic attacks and being signed off work and all of that kind of thing, all the way through to getting some coaching and counseling and all that kind of stuff. The whole process just massively opened my eyes to so many new things in terms of how we manage our well-being, how we think about our well-being, and the really complex like cascade of factors that go into impacting our well-being, like everything from our self-worth and how we take that into work and how we try and prove our worth through working more and more and more, all the way through to communication in school, all the way through to clarity and whether we're cared for or not, whether we feel like we're making a contribution, the human element to it, just all of it. It just really opened my eyes to it, and I just got really geeky for it. I just got a taste for it, and that was it. I just, absolutely loved it. Studied to be a nutritionist, then a coach, then studied to be a mental health and exercise coach. And then, started my little business, and I've been doing this about nearly 7 years now.
Sweet, man. Thank you also for being super open and honest in that space and vulnerable. And I think it's quite refreshing when you hear somebody who, there's no sexism here, but a bloke that goes, I hit the wall, I struggled, but I've come out the other side of it. So I suppose there's the thanks and the gratitude of coming out the other side of it, but now wanting to try and do something to support other people. And I wonder if it's okay, if you're all right with doing this, and tell me to do one if not. Where did that come from? Do you know what I mean? Because I know that many of our listeners will be in that space where the pressure is heavy. There's SATs and there's marking and there's every responsibility, especially in that primary setting. Of a male in a primary setting was probably asked to do every sport, every tech event, every whatever else. Not always, but generally is the case. And I wonder if you could maybe tell us a little bit about where that came from, if you're comfortable in that space, because I think that level of honesty and transparency, I think our listeners will really, really resonate with.
Yeah, 100%. I'm more than happy to talk about any of this stuff. In my first book that I wrote with Sage, I was very blunt about where I got to and how this kind of came about. So essentially it was a real mixture of factors for me, which I think is the case for a lot of people, sort of on the surface level, if you like. It was my first year teaching year 6 that year. My 5th year of teaching was my first year teaching year 6, and it brought so many challenges. I actually had quite a supportive head teacher at the time. I'm not going to kind of talk about wider teams, but my head teacher in particular was supportive, and she really tried to reinforce the narrative of we were a junior school as well, so this is a whole school exam period. This isn't about just you, that narrative. She was great for that, but I still put so much internal pressure on myself to try and prove my worth and prove what I was capable of through those very arbitrary tests, basically. And I'd like to think I didn't pass that on to the children. I certainly tried not to in that year. But I took that onto my own shoulders and was working every minute, God sent, weekends, evenings, all that was going on. Trying to prove myself to myself, I think, was a huge part of it. And I've really, through counseling and coaching and all that kind of stuff, I have realized that my self-worth was basically like in the toilet. Like, I didn't really have any self-worth for various reasons I won't go into. At the same time, my ex-partner and I, we broke up. So our relationship was about 5-6 years. The last year she was au pairing in Africa for family. and she signed a contract to do a second year there without telling me. So that relationship quickly just kind of disintegrated into pieces, was a bit of a train wreck. So I was kind of processing that. As well as that, then my LSA, learning support assistant, Sally, who was kind of like the school nan. That's the only way I can describe her. She was like, she'd been there forever. She was so lovely, so warm. I think she should have been on EastEnders. Like, she loved her caravan club, smoked like a chimney, drank like a fish, like just proper character. She was sadly diagnosed with terminal cancer in sort of towards the end of the autumn term of that year, and she sadly passed away, I think it was sort of early June time, obviously the following year. So that was kind of going on, and she was off work, and we were still keeping in touch, and she wanted to keep in touch with what the kids were up to and stuff, and she sent me pictures as she was getting her hair cut shorter and shorter, and she sent me herself looking all glamorous and stuff after each haircut, and we tried to keep in touch as much as we could. And there was, for me personally, was a lot of unresolved grief from losing my own grandparents, all this kind of stuff that came up in therapy, essentially. But a huge factor of it was the self-worth piece as well. I was really, all of that stuff was going on in my head, and teaching is such an incredible profession, but it can also be a bottomless pit. So if you've got stuff going on in your personal life that you don't want to face, you don't want to think about, teaching is there for you, right? You can throw yourself into teaching and it will be there every minute of every day, 365, you can never finish it. So that's what I did. That was a huge part of it for me. Was there was so much stuff going on personally. I was brimming over my capacity already personally, but I just threw myself into work as a distraction. That was it, really. Those are the main factors, I'd say.
What's really interesting, I'll go back to that, the supportive head, which is a great point, but ultimately it cascades down. When you're filling different pieces up, and I think Ben, one of the panels that you run in at Bear with Parent Pay Group, I kind of, for somewhere, I just kind of came out with a comment, and I was like, it's ultimately like filling a cup, and then it goes onto the saucer, and then it goes onto the table, it goes onto the floor. It has to go somewhere, and ultimately that is coming out of the system. It's just filtering down, and it's just dropping and dropping and dropping. And I think that thing of, I'm not saying individually, I don't know every single case, but ultimately, I think like my children, I think they see it and they sense it. And even though you're doing a great job to mask it, it's very difficult to know whether actually they are picking it up or not. And that's not necessarily your fault, especially when you're going through those challenges. But unless you are a swan, and I suppose even if you are, the ability to just maintain and look perfect, but be pedaling like hell under the water is great until they come closer to the edge and get closer to you, until I'm sure you're building those relationships. They will see what's going on under the surface. That is the challenge, isn't it? Whether we like to mask it or not, I think they probably are sensing it. And I think you are not alone. How many teachers are actually feeling self-worth, overwhelmed, and all those other things? And I think that's why your role is so important now. You've seen it, you've experienced it, and actually now you want to make a difference and want to support it. So I'm guessing you said you talk with multi-academy trusts and head teachers and an individual level. I'm guessing it's not just a diet plan or a session of yoga or a staff development. What does that look like in regards to the kind of work that you're trying to step into that is a long-term strategic aim that is built and a blueprint of the holistic education system for a school or a structure rather than just tokenistic? What does that look like then, Charlie?
Yeah. So just to focus on the organisation element of it for a second, over the years, I've just through the one-to-one work, which is obviously where I started, the same problems kept coming up and coming up, and it was people didn't feel cared for, or they struggled to care for themselves for various reasons. Environments didn't support them. There wasn't a culture of care. It was looked down on to care for yourself, set boundaries. So care was this big thing. So that's the first pillar. The first sort of domain that we look at is, are there environments of care? Is there a culture of care? But also, are people skilled in caring for themselves? And also, are people checked up on? Are they supported in that? All of that kind of stuff. That's your classic well-being stuff, right? Your self-care sort of stuff. And that was fine. And we obviously, on an individual level, I was working with people on that. But I was realizing that I was so far down this river and people were way up there falling in because of so many other reasons. And I was down there trying to help people get themselves out the river. There were so many more factors that were going into this. And I started kind of essentially taking all the transcripts from my coaching calls and going through them and trying to find the really common threads. So we came up with the 6 C's, care being that first one. But then we also have clarity, capacity, competence, connection and contribution. So when I go into a school, we use our kind of diagnostic tool that we've developed, which is just really, really simple. The initial one is 36 questions that go into each of the 6 domains. There's 6 questions for each domain. We go in and it essentially assesses how that C is perceived by staff, how are staff behaving around that C and connected to that C, but also how is that C governed by leadership essentially and beyond, and then also what's the impact of all the above. So we go in and we look at these 6 C's and we kind of assess where they are, but from that we're then able to build out like 2 roadmaps. So when I go into school, I support individual staff, groups of staff, whole cohorts of staff through group coaching, workshops, all of these different elements. But then on a leadership tier as well, we look at what leaders can do for that. So for example, we say, right, okay, let's look at clarity. Clarity, by the way, is a massive one. In a nutshell, it's communication. Are staff clear on their roles? Are staff clear on the expectations that are being placed on them? Do things get communicated in a really clear and sort of timely way? So that's clarity in a real nutshell. But we go in and we do this kind of domain check across these areas, and it's really nice because it gives us this very clear picture of where the school is really, really strong and how the school can double down on those strengths and what they could do more of. But also it gives us the areas of development and what we can then support leaders with. I don't think there's many people in schools, and I might be naive because I know I've worked with people who are not always the most kind-hearted. Maybe they don't have everyone's best intentions at heart. But I don't think that most people in our schools are there to be cruel or distant or cold. You know, the kind of people that get into teaching, we're not there to do damage to other people. We're there to support each other. And that's what I love about the work that you guys do. It's positive, it's progressive. You focus on what you can do rather than what you can't do. And you guys look for the opportunities at every turn. I like to think that in most of our schools, most people are like that. And I think there's a real culture of bashing leaders at the moment and really putting a lot of pressure on individual people rather than looking at it as like a team effort. But that's why I do it that way. I like to try and see how I can support leaders, because the amount of pressure that is on their shoulders is absolutely just insane at the moment. So yeah, that's just a little bit about kind of the structure, the 6 C's, and kind of how we start to approach it.
And I think it's quite interesting as well, isn't it, that from a coaching perspective, it can come from a sport conversation. Naturally, most people go into it's a sporting coach, that's where you see a coach. Or if you're in a business space, you might have a coach that's going to help you. Coaching is like normalized in those 2 professions, whereas in education, I think in the US there's a tech coach model that's relatively normal, and you hear some people that have been banging the drum around having coaching sessions for staff development. And even there are some models, I think, maybe the XP schools would be a little bit like this, where the teaching is more like coaching as well. So education, students have coaches as opposed to, and in your world, Steve, obviously, in apprenticeship world, you have apprenticeship coaches, don't we? So, and they're very much a sense of that they're not trying to teach you something, they're coaching you through because they've got some experience and they understand apprenticeships, and therefore they can help you get into that space. Now, a long-winded way of saying that you are in this space of helping teachers and helping organizations and helping leaders by coaching them into this healthy habits and around this diagnostic that you've worked through. I suppose there's 2 questions. I'm going to go with this one first, which is, how on earth do you convince people that they need coaching when there's so many priorities about their health, when there's so many priorities, when it could be X, Y, and Z they could be spending their money and time and effort doing?
Not very well is probably the answer, to be completely honest. My thing has always been, I have an idea, and you'll appreciate it, Ben. I have an idea and I just have to get it out. I have to write about it. And my way of kind of thinking through my ideas is just to write. And it is, it's not always fantastic, but I'll just write and I'll go back and I'll edit it. Way back when, when was it? End of 2019, probably. I just started a little Instagram page and was just posting stuff. Totally different topics then. It was very much about health and fitness. For the first 6 months, it wasn't even about teachers. This was way before any of this stuff. But I just started kind of writing these ideas down. And over time, obviously, those ideas kind of snowball. So at the moment, literally all I'm doing is I'm writing about what I do with schools. I'm sharing the stories of what I do with schools. I'm trying to kind of explain the 6 C's, and I've just started writing my second book as well. So it's lovely because I'm doing a lot of I'm in that research phase of trying to collate as many stories and case studies and everything. So I'm writing an awful lot about this. So I guess in a way, I'm kind of hoping and praying that people see it, they resonate with it. And I think what it takes is, it takes people, which again, I think is where your whole mission comes in. It takes people who are willing to try and do things differently and who are willing to put people first. Like it takes leaders. I'm not putting the weight of all of this on leaders, but it is typically assistant heads and deputy heads, Senkos, who first get in contact with me. It's not typically head teachers. I usually meet them later on if I meet them before going into school, which sometimes doesn't happen at all. In fact, I've worked with schools for a whole year and never met the head teacher, which is another topic. But yeah, these people reach out, and these people, the penny has dropped that they have to put well-being before results. They have to put the horse before the cart. They have to put people before progress, basically, which is a very, very, I've just been re-listening to Simon Sinek's Infinite Game this week, but it's a very, very, like, it feels counterintuitive. It feels completely counterintuitive to invest £2,000 that could go on someone coming in and helping with the history curriculum, or coming in more likely and helping with the maths curriculum, because maths results were lower. It seems totally counterintuitive to put that £2,000, say, into having someone like me come in and work with staff and get people to be healthier, happier, reduce absence, reduce illness, improve productivity, bring back people's joy, bring back people's passion. It does seem counterintuitive, but it takes the right message to reach the right people at the right time. And those people already, I think, have to be looking to do things differently. They have to be invested in their people, not just what the governor's going to say, what's the CEO going to say, And I think sometimes it does take people putting their own neck on the line, which is very, very brave, I think.
Leadership, another wonderful book, Brené Brown and all of that style. But I think ultimately, what it takes, and this is not a leadership thing, this is an education thing. It takes calm, it takes considered vision, and it takes leadership and strategy over a long-term plan to look at things and actually put them in place, to constantly consider and think, no, this is our plan, we'll stick to it. You find a lot of times in education and business as well, ultimately things are responded to when in crisis. That often the best leaders are talked about how they go in and go, look what they fix, but ultimately in leadership about creating something that ultimately is so strong over a period of time that it actually dampens down the need to constantly go in and be a leadership in crisis. We're not the NHS, people are not coming into accident and emergency ultimately with things that they need to fix right there and then. We should be taking a more leveled approach, and ultimately taking it back to the sport context, often in education, where it's like watching 5-year-olds play football when they don't understand formation, and constantly they're kicking over to the left-hand side, and everybody's chasing. Let's history this year isn't great. Let's go to history. Maths this year, that needs picking. Let's go maths. And I'm like, okay, but what's the strategy overall to lift and constantly raise the tide, as well as that job? Continually drive your strengths as well as improving the underperformance. That is strategy and vision, rather than just going, let's do this, let's do this. That's not a strategy. That's not a vision. That's just crisis. And I think that's the challenge through underfunding and all the different things that we're aware of in education. It's causing crisis leadership and crisis management. And that's not the leader's fault. That's basically the systemic issue that we're causing. And then you throw health and all of those things into there. And like with the NHS, we're better than the treatment rather than the prevention. We bring people like yourselves and all of the coaching, all the great stuff like yourselves and all of those things it could do, but only when something is already happening and already happened as a post-mortem. We're not doing anything to then say, how do we better in terms of our health across the staff body, so we don't get to an issue where the story you told right at the beginning of the podcast, we dampen that down, because actually we're leveling and supporting people across a continuation rather than just a response to something that's happened, I guess. So is that what you're trying to do, to try and at least step into that and cascade it before? It's not a response. People are not just bringing you in when the mental health and the whole health of the staff body is is terrible, surely. Or maybe that's where you're getting your work, Charlie. I don't know. But what is it? Is that where you're seeing the best results and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can think about the schools I've got that I'm working with on an annual basis now. I can imagine the ones, and they won't mind me saying this, where they have reached crisis point, huge staff turnover, loads and loads of very serious complaints taken to governors and beyond, a school in crisis, right? A staff in crisis as well. And they've reached out because they are like, right, we need to do something now, but they are so far down the line that we're just trying to bring them back. And then you've got the schools who are very, very kind of forward thinking, who do know that it is the people that run the school. And I'm not going to say it's one of those, what's the thing you always see online? Oh, I've got a unpopular opinion. I'm not going to say it's an unpopular opinion, but I do think the staff should come before the kids. Personally, I think the staff should come before the children. Genuinely do. We do, especially now with the changes in, the socioeconomic status of lots of the families we support, parental mental health, parents working multiple jobs, parents not able to work, the whole shift in society that we've seen over the last 5-10 years, but especially since COVID, our like I say, crisis management is support the families, give the parents everything they ask for, support the children with everything we've got until we've got no more. And we just drain our teachers. I always say we treat our school staff like they're towels ready to be wrung dry. And I also don't like it when people say that staff are resources. Like your resources, your glue sticks run out. Your staff are not resources. They're people. They're human beings. They're not there to be used up. I think we need to change it. If we just put our staff first, they will take care of everything. If they feel valued, they will give the extra that you need them to give. Not every single day, not every single weekend, but they will go that little bit further when you need them to, and they're not going to resent it, and they're not going to burn out because of it if you put them first. Whereas what we are doing, I think crisis management is a great way to think about it. We're running around, putting out fires, trying to appease parents, trying to do what we can to support the kids, but we're all bordering on burnout the whole time because we're not being looked after.
We had a super podcast, and I know Steve knows where I'm going to go with this. And we had a friend of the podcast who said something when we first met him in person, and then when he talked about it on the podcast, and it has stuck with me probably as much as any of the messages that we've heard, which is, he said two phrases, and he sung them actually. It's remember your why, fill your cup. Remember your why, fill your cup. And Action Jackson, many of our listeners will remember that podcast, but also know how good of a human being he is. He invested without even probably realizing. I know, Steve, you'll say the same thing, won't you? Some of the things that he helped you through, some of the things that I've listened to and watched how he's navigated his family situation. In fact, even something he posted on Instagram, LinkedIn this week, about his daughter's birthday. You might have seen it if anybody's seen that. Just really gets that. How do you fill your own cup first before you start trying to empty it and fill into everybody else's cup? And do you know what? Even as a sat in this space now as somebody who would probably say that he's as good as he's ever been in his life, wellness wise. I still have to keep reminding myself I need to fill this first, because there's nothing to give if you're giving on empty. And I think what you're talking about there is bang on. You look after your staff and make sure that they look after themselves, and they'll give her the best. And it's not about asking them, like you said, to do above and beyond all the time, but how do we do that? And I wonder whether then you could talk to us a little bit about what some of those practical things might look like. People will listen to this. There'll be loads of people listening to this at a weekend, because that's the only time they get a chance to listen to anything and do anything for themselves, or in an evening. And you're thinking to yourself, that's the nature of life. And they might want to do some learning, but they can't actually do it in a work day. They've got to find some extra time outside of it to do their own development. So the people who are listening to this as leaders or as educators, what have you learned, and what might be some things that they might be able to put into their own space?
You said the word then. I think the first thing is, what I just said about looking after your staff, putting them first, and individuals putting themselves first. This is also hard. I know I rattle through that very quickly, but that's not me saying that this stuff is easy. Like, this stuff is not easy at all. It's really, really difficult. And I think a lot of us have got limiting beliefs that get in our way as well, be it low self-worth, be it the conditioning that we've all been through, I think especially if you're between the ages, and I can only really talk for my own generation here, but if you're all between the ages of 30 and 45, I'd say, maybe 30 to 50, you were probably brought up with, it's not about you, you know, don't be an attention seeker. It's not about you. Don't make it about you. Go and be helpful. Go be nice. Go and be kind. You go and help out. You be good. Like, so many of us were brought up with that narrative that we were like, well, it's not about me. I can't put myself first. I can't do anything for myself. And so we make everything about everyone else's needs. And I think a lot of us struggle with our own, putting our own needs first. But yeah, I just want to caveat this. It's not easy. Like, this stuff is simple, but that does not mean it is easy. And I think our own thinking can hold us back sometimes. I think the first thing is to create space. And that's maybe the most difficult thing. But when I say create space, I mean, can you have 5 minutes before you get out of the car, right? And in that 5 minutes, you might just do nothing. You might just allow your brain to go into what we call the default mode network and process your emotions and process your memories and just clear your mind a little bit and just have 5 minutes of thinking space. You might do, again, I'm not going to go on about yoga and breath work and stuff, but you might want to do a meditation or a breath work or something like that. You might want to actually have a snack before you go into school, or actually have a drink so that, you're not running around all day without a glass of water. Likewise, at lunchtime, can you take that 5 minutes? Can you create that space? Because I think a big part of why so many school staff are running around so dysregulated and our central nervous system is so dysregulated. We're on the border of fight or flight so often, adrenaline through the roof, cortisol through the roof, but us not giving it enough time to bring us back down again the other side, constantly fighting fires. Our amygdala is pinging at threats left, right and center. We're making memories and associations that child sends off my stress alert and stresses me out. That parent does the same. That person, when they email me, that causes me stress. We're creating all these negative associations and we're rushing around fighting fires, and we're never taking that 2, 3, 5 minutes just to slow down. So I think, I know that sounds so simple, but I really do think if anyone started there, having 5 minutes, could be 5 minutes before the kids get up where you actually have a hot drink in the morning, could be 5 minutes before you go to bed, not on your phone, scrolling, social media. But if you can just create a little bit of gap between that stressor and how you react, I think that makes a massive difference. And when you start doing it, it's crazy to realize how on the go you always are. And because that's how most of us have survived for the last 10, 20, 30 years, I think especially if you're a parent as well. I've got a one-to-one client. She's got 5 kids. She takes, I'm going to get this wrong, but she's at the swimming pool 5 days a week, taking different children to different lessons and trying to get her own swim in. So she's not getting home 5 nights a week until like 9 o'clock. Do you know what I mean? So if we go, here's an hour yoga routine, here's an hour workout, then you've got to do meal prep, but you're not allowed to eat sugar and you can't eat bread and you can't do this and you can't do, and we throw all this health and wellness guru stuff, dogma at her. There's no way any of it's going to get done. So we've started just by literally saying, all right, your life is very, very, very full on. She's also got a few medical conditions that complicate her life as well. Can we create just a little bit of space? Can we just start there? So I would definitely recommend people thinking about that.
Thinking back to just things like things I've read, things I've stepped into, and all those kind of things. And the thing that jumps out of what you've just been talking about, those marginal gains, that those tiny micro improvements of actually make a massive difference. And it might be where they start with that, and yes, they might never get to an hour a day or all those kind of things, but just tiny little incremental changes make a massive difference over a period of time. I know Ben probably wanted to jump in because Ben was never not at the pool, or was for such a long period of time as a dad of 2 girls that both swam, and Ben was probably not in the pool but was there every single night and mornings and all of those different things. I know Ben's routine was absolutely layered by it, but I think it's really interesting, isn't it, when you start to consider all these different things. And I know that your focusing is on education, but do you feel that teaching and education is a more stressful profession and is so different to anything else? Or do you just feel that actually that's not your comfort, but that's where you want to make the difference and you feel you can make the biggest difference because your lived experience?
Yeah. Probably that last point. I think it's that lived experience, isn't it, of knowing the context and the stories and the terminology and the language and being able to kind of put things into real practical examples. Like writing this second book, pretty much all I've done so far is just write down scenarios that I've personally been in. I know my clients have been in. I think I say this to my clients, and I'm definitely going to put it at the start of the book as well, but having coached all of them, over the last nearly 7 years has given me such a I didn't really realize this, I'll be completely honest, until recently, such a weirdly sort of almost like profound insight. Because when you're a one-to-one coach, someone, they don't hold back. Like, I have cried with clients on FaceTime and Zoom, in person as well. Sometimes they have told me the deepest, darkest secrets. They have shared things with me that they've never told anyone else. And not because I'm some amazing, incredible coach, but just because they've got space to. But that's given me this really, it's my experience, but it's also their experience. And I think I'm realizing that more and more. So I think that's why, I think, though, for me, in terms of like why teachers, I think it's because it's a profession that can have the biggest impact. And I know, nurses and doctors save lives, and firefighters save lives and whatever else. But for me, having been a teacher, I see the potential impact that every single person, no matter your role in school, can make. If the passion is there, if the energy is there, if the drive is there, you can. And it all sounds very cheesy, but you literally change lives, you save lives, you shape lives, you take the limits off of people when they go and do things they never thought they could do. You transform people's worlds. And I think we get so bogged down in, I haven't put my data on, I haven't marked that, I haven't marked those mock tests, so I haven't got my planning in, that we lose so much of the magic of the profession. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do, is remove all the roadblocks so that we get the magic of the profession back for individuals, and that people can kind of access that. The stressful part, there's a lot of really interesting statistics coming out about this. The latest one I've seen, I think the latest education support teacher wellbeing index, I think it was 76% of staff reported being stressed. I think that was this year. But I found a recent statistic that was UK average adult, 74% of the UK national average adult reports being stressed of the UK workforce. So got 74% of people say they're stressed in the UK, 76% of teachers say they're stressed. The numbers aren't worlds and worlds apart. I think teaching is very, very nuanced, though, because there's a huge emotional load that obviously we take on now. We've seen obviously huge relative reductions in obviously funding and sourcing of different kind of services, and closing of youth clubs, and family centres and first start centres, and all these different things that we've seen obviously happen over the last 20 years or so, 15, 20 years. And obviously, as we all know, teachers and school staff are bearing the brunt of that weight of responsibility, right? So I think the emotional load, particularly in the last 5 years, but last 10 years really, the emotional load that teachers are carrying is greater than ever. I think another thing that's very different about teaching is that task switching and the decision fatigue that comes with that, and having to constantly pull yourself back. And you've literally and metaphorically got 100 tabs open, and you're switching between things, and you're thinking about what that child's going to do, and you're thinking about how to manage that situation, and then you're also thinking about how to differentiate that thing, and how you've worded that, and this, that, the other, and then you're thinking about that club after school, and then that person brings in another problem. And do you know what I mean? As teachers, you're constantly pivoting and task switching. So I think the cognitive demands are different to a lot of other jobs. A lot of jobs nowadays have a very, very high workload, but it's the cognitive side and it's the emotional labor, I think, that really does. And obviously working with young people, the patience and the compassion we have to show, and desperately trying to self-regulate whilst doing all of the things we just described. So yeah, I think teaching is different in that way. Not saying it's harder, not saying it's better, worse, whatever, but it's a different kind of beast.
Yeah, I saw something, I'm going to absolutely ruin it, but I saw a comedian talking about, he asked the person what they do for a job, and then I don't know if you saw it, it was Lee Nelson. He was talking about he manages complex cases of antisocial behaviour, and he's like, oh, and then he goes, oh, you're a teacher. But yeah, there is when they were trying to work out what he was, but that's how they described it. I think where I kind of see it now is that, yeah, I do think teaching is a special space there, and all the people that are in teaching were like, oh well, it's this, it's that, the other. I now work outside of it, teaching, and many of us, well, all three of us on the call do work outside of teaching full time, and there's different pressures in that. But I think you're right, that switching is a great way to navigate it, and to see it as that's the thing that possibly makes this quite challenging. And interestingly, there's a professionalization conversation. We had a great conversation on a couple of the webinars recently about whether teachers are treated like professionals. I think there's that part of it, because it's such a, everybody can be a teacher because they've all been to school. That old joke, and the pressure that then comes with that. Plus the funding, plus all the other bits that we've already mentioned. I think I'd love to dig in. One of the things I was looking at in prep for this, because I know that we've been connected on Instagram for a little while. Weirdly, by the way, just to call this out, super weird the other day, but in a great way, that I posted something on Instagram, and then and Charlie went, as if you're there in Colchester. I'm literally at the end of the street there. Let's catch up. So we did, and we had a game of paddle and a coffee, didn't we? And which was lovely to do that in person. But I was looking at some stuff on your Instagram recently again, and you talked about Sunday Scaries, and I thought that's pretty cool. I do remember that. In fact, actually, when it was bank holiday recently, I know that a couple of teacher friends of mine are like, "This is buzzing, but it's not Sunday Scaries now; it's Monday Scaries." Could you just give us a little bit of why you went there, and then perhaps what can teachers do in that space? Because you talked about space before you go in to a lesson, eating something, giving yourself a bit of Sunday Scaries. What for you? What are they, and what can people do about them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a massive topic. I think for some people now, the Sunday Scaries start on Saturday morning, which is a really horrible part. I think a lot of people lose a lot of their weekends. A lot of the joy and pleasure of the weekends get sucked up either by obviously catching up on work or preparing and all the kind of stuff that we've all done before, or just the rumination and the worrying about it. So Sunday Scaries are essentially, psychologically, they're a type of like anticipatory anxiety, basically. So we're already worrying and thinking about the stresses. I think for us as teachers, what can often happen, I think I alluded to earlier, your brain perceives a stressor or a threat, right? And your amygdala starts kind of ringing the alarm bells, and adrenaline goes up and cortisol goes up usually. But what also happens, like the amygdala is responsible for creating like emotional, or helping to create emotional memories. And then your hippocampus gets involved and, makes associations and things like that. So what happens over time is we start to anticipate how uncertain, how stressful, how just all over the shop our weeks can become. And the more we go through that, the better the brain learns, like, oh my goodness, like you've got this coming up. So it starts ringing the alarm bells earlier and earlier and earlier. So it's not that we're actually in a stressful or necessarily dangerous situation on a Sunday night. It's that the brain knows what's coming and we've created those associations. So I think the first, I like to talk about the 3 C's with this. So the first step is thinking about calming. The second step is thinking about clarity. And that's obviously one of our big C's that we use with schools as well. But clarity is so important to create that sense of safety and to bring down the basically the brain and body stress response. And then certainty. So calm, clarity, certainty is the order that I work through. And I use this. I don't think I've ever worked with a teacher who I've not used this with, because it's such a common thing that comes up. So with calm, this is so individual. I think it really, really depends on what that person finds helps regulate their central nervous system. Essentially, we can start by thinking about our 5 senses. So there's loads of different techniques and strategies for this. But if you think about, I'm sat here with 2 massive, big, bright lights at me, and this is not particularly nice. If you're in an artificially lit room and you've got the kids running around, if you're at soft play, basically, right? If you're in the metaphorical version of soft play, if it's loud, it's noisy, coming into summer, if it's too hot and you're sweaty, if you're thirsty and you're hungry, if centrally you're not in a comfortable place, it's going to be really hard to create calm and to regulate your central nervous system. So think about your 5 senses. So is it a nice cold shower? Is it a nice warm drink? Is it some of those smelly sticks that you get when the Albus oils when you've got a cold or whatever? Is it lavender spray? There's quite good research behind lavender and regulating your central nervous system. But just think about your 5 senses. Is it going for a walk in the fresh air, or getting, putting a face mask on, or putting your comfy pajamas on, or having a lie down on the sofa? Or is it going out and sweating out, getting your endorphins up, getting a bit of a sweat on and using endorphins to do their job and bring down your body's stress response and make you feel more resilient? There's loads of different ways that you can calm your brain and body, but again, it could be mind dumping, could be yoga, could be meditation, could be breath work, could be a puzzle, could be crochet, could be a Lord of the Rings marathon, whatever you like, what's going to calm you down, basically. And then we move on to clarity. And this is really useful because, as I say, the brain's going forward and it's trying to plug the gaps into the unknown, because the brain hates unknowns. That is a stressor in of itself. It's trying to plug these gaps. So it's thinking of the worst case scenarios to prepare you. If you can go through, and I'm not saying spend all Sunday looking at your planning, but if you can go through, plan out your week, maybe you want to kind of plan out your meals or stuff like that, that boring life admin kind of stuff, get the food shopping done, have a chat with your other half if you got one, have a chat with your kids if you can, just start to get certainty around what this week's going to look like, and obviously we can never be certain of everything, and we can't control everything, but starting to fill in the gaps, starting to create a sense of certainty. Almost, we know the power of visualization. There's fantastic research behind that now. Starting to almost visualize that week and then how it goes. And then lastly, can we create, so that's creating clarity, right? Creating a sense of, I know, I'm clear, I'm thinking clearly, I know what's coming up. And then we can start to create certainty. So this is more the practical side. So we can think about laying your clothes out for the next morning, I don't know, putting petrol in the car, so the petrol light's not going to come on, putting your breakfast together, getting the kids' lunch boxes ready, whatever it is, whatever you can do to create a sense of certainty, so that you're set up for the start of the week at least. If you can think about Monday to Wednesday and what can you do to prepare, you're starting to create that sense of psychological, not necessarily psychological safety in the normal term of being willing and open to make mistakes and that kind of stuff, but a sense of safety psychologically, so to speak. You're starting to reduce the stresses, reduce the potential potholes. I always say to my clients, imagine a country road and you've got potholes and wheelie bins, and there's a tree falling over, there's a cow tipped over in the middle of the road. It's an absolute nightmare. Our job is to go through and start to remove some of that debris so that you can have a smooth running of it. Because there's always going to be bumps in the road and bends in the road. But if you can start to smooth out the path a little bit, your week does just tend to run that little bit more, smoothly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some really great practical things in all of this conversation. It feels like we're getting a coaching session, which is awesome. And also the people who are listening to this are going, do you know what? There might be some things that we can put into place here. So, we're kind of going to get into some of the quickfire questions in a minute and bring them in. But before we do, I wanted to just step in about the conversation around community, because I know you're part of our Edufuturists community. You've championed what we do, share stuff into your work, into your world, into those spaces. You've been to some of our events, and we also had conversations there about how we can continue to support that community. But one of the things that I know has helped me with my well-being and my mental health in that space is as a teacher. Teachers become your close friends, don't you? We probably spend more time with some of our teacher colleagues than we do with our spouses or our kids. And there's a community piece in schools, but also the broader communities like the ones that we're trying to build. Like, I suppose my question, if it is a question or a comment there, is about why did you get involved in this, and why do you think it's important for community to be part of that? And yeah, the Edufuturist stuff tied into what you do, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it is. What I admire about you guys is that I feel like in education at the moment, and I totally understand why, and I was part of this party for a long time, there's a bit of a mindset, a bit of a mentality of we can't do that. Why can't we do that? Not why me, but what, it's broken. Why is it this way? Why can't we do that? Rather than what you guys, I think, do, which is sort of flip that on its head and think, well, how could we do it? Right? Not why won't that work? That won't work. That won't work. Why won't that work? Not that. How could we make it work? How could this thing be done differently? How could we change things? How could we have different conversations, bring different people in, use technology differently, like all those different things. And I think that is a massive thing I admire, is that forward thinking, but not just looking to new stuff that's coming in, but thinking about doing stuff differently and trying to turn those. This is sound very cheesy. I didn't prepare this in advance, I swear, but trying to turn the obstacles into opportunities, and just trying to not look on the bright side and not be toxically positive or anything like that, but just look for the opportunities and look for what can be done rather than all the barriers that are sort of in the way. So that's what I've always loved about your stuff and just your mindset, the way that you talk about issues, the way that you think about things, the way that you bring loads and loads of different people together. I've rambled on now, mate. I can't remember what your question was, but that's what I love about Edufuturists.
I think it was more about like community full stop, and even in terms of like communities in schools, like why do you think the taking of a village and working together? I think that's maybe where we were going, weren't it?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think so. We're in the Rewriting Wellbeing Framework and the work I do, we've got connection. And that's the first chapter of the book I'm writing at the moment. That's one I decided to start with because I think it underpins everything. We are built, no matter what your religious beliefs are or whatever else, we are built to be social. We are social creatures. We connect. We have to connect with each other, even if you're an introvert, even if, you spend 10 minutes with one person and your social battery is dead for a week. We need each other. Like you say, it takes a village, right? We have to have community and support. We see this in every primate that's ever lived. We see this in worms. We see this in every animal. We see this in our children and how tolerant and open they are to other people. We see this in everywhere we look. People need people, like we need groups. And I think another big part of that is a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of contribution. And I think we struggle to have that as individuals in silos, in isolation. And, I left teaching just over 4 years ago now. And I've worked not in this office, but I've worked basically by myself with a laptop for 4 years. And luckily, more recently in the last sort of 2 years, I'm spending a lot more time in schools in person, which is doing me the world of good. Most of my interactions are over Zoom though, and I've realised how tough that's been for my mental health. Just being in a silo, like having a conversation like this is amazing, but getting out and being with real people in real environments where you can actually see each other and vibe off each other, for want of a better word. But the subtle cues, that you belong, that someone values you, that you're contributing to a team. All of that stuff is what makes humans humans. It's what separates us from so many other species, right? It's what makes us amazing. And I think if we take away that connection, we take away that community, we know how detrimental that is for mental health, overall. And I think it's the strength of us together, as the pack, as you guys would say, that is our greatest strength. It's what we can do together, not what we can do as individuals. So yeah, I think that's it.
And yeah, and I know I've come back in again, Steve. Sorry, I think it's really interesting. I'm reading a book called Friends at the moment by Robin Dunbar, who's famous for Dunbar's number, which is the idea that you can only make up to a maximum of 150 decent connections of people that you know. And he talks about that from primates and all sorts, but also in the human space. Incredible. I met him in person, which was just phenomenal. Reading this book about friends, and he talks about how loneliness, and many of us know this, but just to reiterate, loneliness, it has a bigger impact on our health deterioration than anything else, including smoking, overeating, lack of exercise, loneliness. And that, him saying that as a scientist, the research says if you don't have connection and community, you're more likely to die young, you're more likely to have issue. And I'll attest to it. I am rubbish when I'm on my own. I'm grateful for, I've got good people like Steve in my life who I know check in, and we build and I think that's why it's important, why we try and build the community that we're doing. And I think it's important that for people like you to be part of it, to help us shape it and help support that. So thank you for what you're doing. Steve, I'll
just take a back seat. I love it. No, we'll talk again. We always finish the podcast with a quickfire series of questions. So I'll go first, Ben will come in, and then I'll finish. Hopefully ready. You say that you're a friend and you're in the community and you listen to the podcast. Let's see. If schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoy the experience, what would change overnight?
Can you repeat that one? I'm not trying to buy myself time, I promise.
It's all right. It's no problem. I'll go again. If schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed the experience, what would change overnight?
If schools were like restaurants, okay. I think, I want to say, we would then look after our staff, because we know that the staff would then, your servers, your kitchen staff, whoever, we'd look after the background staff because we know that they would bring their best to the customers. We'd focus more on the quality of ingredients, I guess, so to speak. And we'd make sure that, we were then taking that forward to the person at the front. We wouldn't just solely focus on, hopefully anyway, we wouldn't solely focus on what does the manager think. We'd focus on the people. Is that the right answer?
Love it. So the second one is, what's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
I've got to suffer to be successful or to make an impact. That's definitely what I told myself. If I'm not suffering, if I'm not suffering, I'm not doing enough.
Okay. Last one. If a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
I'd like to think I'd say, 10-year-old says, when I go to school, I'd like to say to open up opportunities for you in the future so that you have choices and options. You're not limited. You can access what you want to access. You can explore different things. Yeah, you have opportunities.
Well, that makes sense. It is about opportunities and exploring opportunities. So, yeah, great conversation this, and I think there's way more that we could dig into. There's probably one of these conversations that we could talk for longer, and we could pick up other bits. And hopefully, this is the start of more conversations that you might have with the people in the community. And as we continue to build this, I think that focus on the health of teachers that then will have an impact on the well-being and the health of students and families and other things beyond that, I think is good. And I love how it, like I said, it resonated from that Action Jackson stuff and the stuff that we've talked about with Naomi, the stuff that we've talked about with multiple other people about looking after yourself first. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing and for joining us on the podcast. Steve, have you got any final words of wisdom before we wrap for today? I'm sure you have. You've always got wisdom.
Final words, but no wisdom. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it, and I think it's a conversation that needs to happen and should continually be driven forward and always be had. Health first, absolutely.
Amazing.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Charlie, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, and look at that professional setup. If you're not watching this and you're just listening on, I think it's just worth just coming onto YouTube now or even watching. Turn the video on Spotify, because Charlie's got a proper camera, a proper microphone, a proper background. He's almost like a pro. I'm in an hotel room somewhere with no lights on. Steve's in his kitchen. And what have you got outside there? Some nice utensils. No, I'm joking. I can't see it.
That's my over there. That's my utensils drying. So that's next to the sink. So just from the tea. So
we just need to learn from the pro, right? And one of these days we might go pro as well. Mate, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for sharing what you've done.
Futures